please, I'm begging you." But the rancher pulled her up
all right now,
and
you're
was
safe.
stunned.
Come on out
Before
of
we
there.
dive into the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Earl Whitmore's hand shot out like a whip. His fingers tangled in Clara Hayes' dark hair, yanking her to the dirt floor of the shack. The air smelled of stale whiskey and sweat. Clara, only 22, bit back a cry. In the eyes of most, her beauty might have been called a gift. But in this broken home on the Texas frontier, it felt more like a curse. Earl, her mother's second husband, had once been a rancher of promise, but the years had rotted him hollow. Liquor had swallowed his pride, gambling had taken his land, and now only debts remained. By the heat of that midday, men on horseback were already waiting outside the sagging shack, dust rising around their boots, voices coarse with laughter. Earl dragged Clara across the room. His eyes were bloodshot, not just from drink, but from humiliation. He slammed her against the wall. "You'll serve them," he barked, his spit flying. Clara's stomach knotted. For a heartbeat, she thought she had misheard. But the sneer curling Earl's lips told her she hadn't. Her own stepfather was ordering her to pay his debts with her body. Her lips trembled, but her voice rose, shaking. "No, I will not." The refusal cracked something deep inside Earl. The men outside chuckled, their laughter piercing through the open window like barbed wire. Earl's shame turned to fury. He hurled the whiskey bottle in his hand against the wall. It shattered, glass shards scattering like sparks. He lunged at Clara, slapping her so hard her vision went white. She fell against the floorboards, gasping for breath. She scrambled toward the door, but his boot caught her ribs. Pain shot through her chest, sharp as fire. She tasted blood. "Defy me, will you?" His voice was low and feral. He grabbed her by the arm, dragging her out into the glaring Texas sun. The men outside turned to watch, smirking, their eyes crawling over her torn dress and pale skin. Clara stumbled, bruises already blossoming along her arms. She tried to plead, her voice cracking, "Please, no more!" But her words only deepened Earl's rage. His jaw clenched. The shack, the barren fields, the hungry buzzards circling in the distance, everything seemed to conspire against her. Earl shoved her toward the riverbank that cut through the ranch lands. The water shimmered under the midday light, cruel and cold despite the summer heat. Clara's heart hammered in her chest. She whispered inside, almost too faint to hear, "Lord, don't let me be forgotten." Earl's grip tightened around her waist. With a grunt, he lifted her and hurled her into the rushing river. The shock of water stole her breath. The current dragged her under. Her dress clung like chains, wrapping her legs, pulling her deeper. She clawed for the surface, lungs burning, the sunlight above growing faint. Her cries were swallowed by the river's roar. For a moment, all she could hear was her heartbeat pounding in her ears. And then, darkness. The river swallowed her whole. Clara thrashed, but every kick only seemed to tighten the grip of her soaked dress. The fabric twisted around her legs like serpents. Her lungs screamed for air. She clawed upward, breaking the surface for a fleeting gasp before the current dragged her under once more. Above, muffled voices jeered. The debt collectors leaned on their saddles, smirking at her struggle. Earl Whitmore stood on the bank, his face twisted with rage and shame, as if drowning her could wash away his debts. Clara's vision blurred. The world narrowed to water and darkness. She felt her strength ebbing, her spirit slipping into silence. And then, hooves thundered. From the ridge above the river, a lone rider appeared, his silhouette cutting against the blazing sky. A tall bay horse reared, snorting, before plunging down the slope. The rider swung out of the saddle before his boots had even hit the ground. Without a word, he dove into the current. Strong hands seized Clara's arm just as her body went limp. She wanted to cry out, but her lungs burned with water. She clung weakly as the stranger pulled her upward, fighting the current stroke by stroke. The world burst back into light as her head broke the surface. "Hold on," the man's voice growled, steady and sure. Within moments, they reached the bank. He lifted her easily, carrying her onto the grass. Clara coughed violently, water spilling from her lips. She shivered, gasping, her body bruised and trembling. The man knelt beside her, brushing wet hair from her face. He was weathered, his hair streaked with gray, his jaw strong. His eyes, clear and steady, held both anger and compassion. This was Samuel Carter, a rancher whose name was known across the county. A man shaped by hard years and honest work. He looked down at Clara's battered frame, his brow furrowing. Her dress hung in tatters, her skin marred with bruises, her face pale with exhaustion. "What kind of devil would do this to his own kin?" he muttered. Behind them, the debt collectors shifted uneasily in their saddles. Earl spat into the dirt, trying to mask his fear with defiance. "She's mine," Earl snarled. "No man takes what's mine." Samuel rose to his full height, his shadow long against the riverbank. His hand rested on the worn handle of the Colt at his side. His voice was calm, but carried steel. "You lost that right the moment you laid hands on her." The men hesitated. Earl cursed under his breath, then turned his horse with a jerk of the reins. The others followed, their laughter hollow as they rode off in a cloud of dust. Clara lay trembling in the grass, the river's roar fading behind her. She turned her head toward Samuel. For the first time in years, she felt the faintest spark of safety. Samuel crouched again, his voice gentler now. "You're safe, miss. I've got you." Clara coughed, her voice barely above a whisper. Why would you help me?" Samuel's eyes softened. "Because no soul should be left to drown alone." He lifted her into his arms, cradling her as though she were fragile porcelain. With a whistle, his horse trotted near. Samuel mounted with Clara held close and urged the horse toward his ranch. The shack and the river faded behind them. Ahead lay a weathered homestead, the faint curl of smoke rising from its chimney. For Clara, every hoofbeat carried her further from the darkness that had nearly claimed her, and closer to a firelight she had almost forgotten could exist. To continue this adventure, please subscribe to our channel. It helps us keep creating. The ranch house stood like a sentinel against the Texas plains, its walls weathered pine, its porch sagging just slightly, its chimney sending a faint ribbon of smoke into the cooling evening sky. Samuel Carter swung down from his horse, still cradling Clara Hayes in his arms. She was light as a feather, yet the burden of what she had endured weighed heavier than any cattle drive he'd ever known. Inside, the air carried the warmth of wood smoke and the faint tang of leather. Samuel eased Clara onto a narrow bed by the fireplace. Her wet dress clung to her skin, and she shivered despite the heat. He reached for an old quilt folded over the rocker, wrapping it around her trembling shoulders. Clara tried to speak, but the words tangled in her throat. Instead, she stared at the flames, her eyes hollow, as if afraid that even here the shadows might follow. Samuel poured hot water into a tin cup, dropped in a handful of dried herbs, and set it in her hands. "Drink," he said, his voice low, steady. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the cup. The warmth seeped into her palms, and the scent of chamomile and sage rose with the steam. She took a small sip, then another, her body slowly easing. For the first time since the river, she felt something other than fear, a fragile thread of calm. Samuel settled onto the wooden chair beside her. He didn't ask questions. He didn't press. He simply waited, as a man accustomed to silence often does. His eyes remained on the fire, but his presence filled the room like a shield. Minutes stretched. Clara finally drew a shaky breath. "It wasn't the first time," she whispered, her voice rough. Samuel turned his head slightly, but he still said nothing. Clara's hands tightened around the tin cup. "He's been this way for years, my stepfather. Always the drink, always the debts, always the fists." Her words faltered. She looked down, ashamed. "And always me." The logs cracked in the fire. Outside, coyotes yipped in the distance. Clara glanced at Samuel, searching for judgment in his weathered face, but found none. Only patience. She pressed on, the fragments spilling out. "I prayed he'd stop. I prayed until my knees bled, but it never changed. After a while, I thought maybe God had turned his face away from me." Her voice broke. She bit her lip, fighting tears. Samuel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His tone was quiet, but every word carried weight. "Sometimes the silence isn't abandonment. Sometimes it's strength you don't see yet." Clara blinked, the words hanging between them like a rope thrown to a drowning soul. She turned back to the fire, her eyes glistening. The flames blurred, but her heart steadied just a little. Samuel didn't try to fill the silence again. He simply sat with her, a steady figure in the storm that had nearly consumed her. For the first time in years, Clara Hayes allowed herself to close her eyes without fear of what waited when she woke. The night stretched long across the plains. Wind pressed against the cabin walls, carrying the scent of mesquite and dust. Inside, the firelight painted shifting shadows on the floorboards. Clara sat curled in Samuel's quilt, her eyes fixed on the flames as though afraid they might vanish if she blinked. Samuel refilled her cup, setting it gently in her hands. "You'll need your strength," he said. She nodded faintly, sipping, then resting the tin on her knees. For a long while, neither spoke. Only the crackle of wood broke the silence. At last, Clara's voice slipped out, soft as a confession. "You should know what he's done, what Earl has been." Samuel's jaw tightened, but he kept his gaze steady. Clara drew a breath, as though the words themselves cut her lungs. "It began after Mama passed. He changed."
Or maybe he was always that way, and Mama had been the only wall between us. Her voice trembled. "The bottle was his church, the cards his gospel. And when the whiskey ran dry or the debts piled high, it was me who paid the price." Her fingers dug into the quilt, knuckles white. At first it was shouting, then the back of his hand. Later, worse, bruises where no one could see. Nights when I thought my bones would break. Samuel's eyes darkened, but he let her speak, giving her space to empty years of silence. Clara shook her head, tears slipping free. "I prayed. Lord knows I prayed. I asked for deliverance, for mercy, for even one night of peace. But the heavens stayed quiet, and I began to believe it was because of me, because I was cursed." The room went still. The only sound was the wind rattling the shutters. Samuel leaned forward, his voice low, but firm with conviction. "No curse rests on you, Clara. Don't ever believe that." He reached for the Bible that sat on a small shelf near the hearth. Its leather cover was worn, its pages softened by years of use. Opening it with care, he read aloud, his voice steady as the fire. "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you." Isaiah 43:2. Clara's breath caught. She stared at him, the verse striking her deeper than she expected. Water, rivers. The words felt as though they had been written for her, spoken across centuries for this very moment by the banks of that Texas river. She pressed the edge of the quilt to her mouth, sobbing quietly. "Then why save me now? Why not before?" Samuel set the Bible aside, his eyes never leaving hers. Maybe because now you're ready to be free. And maybe because God answers in His time, not ours. Clara closed her eyes, letting the words sink into the fractures of her heart. For the first time in years, the silence she carried did not feel like abandonment. It felt like promise. Outside, the coyotes had gone quiet. Inside, Clara's trembling eased, as though the verse itself had wrapped her in something stronger than quilts or firelight. The hours crept past midnight, yet Clara did not sleep. The fire had burned low, glowing embers casting a gentle red hue across the cabin walls.
Samuel returned from the back room with a folded shirt, its fabric faded but clean. He placed it on the chair beside her. "You'll rest easier out of that wet dress," he said quietly. Clara hesitated, the shame of her torn clothing burning through her. But Samuel's voice carried no judgment, only plain concern. She nodded and slipped into the adjoining room. When she emerged, the oversized shirt draped over her frame, sleeves falling well past her hands. She gathered the fabric close, almost as if it could shield her from the past. Samuel had added another log to the fire. The flames flared, filling the room with warmth. Clara settled back onto the bed, tugging the quilt around her shoulders. She caught Samuel's eyes just once, then looked away, but not before a flicker of something stirred, something she hadn't felt in years: safety. The silence stretched comfortably this time. Samuel sat at the table, mending a strap of leather by lantern light. Clara watched him quietly. His hands were rough, marked by years of ranch work, yet there was patience in the way he stitched each thread. She thought of Earl, his hands always clenched in fists, knuckles raw from striking. A shiver ran through her. She pulled Samuel's shirt tighter around herself. The contrast was unbearable, and yet, in a way, healing. After a while, Clara spoke. "You don't ask much. Most men would have demanded answers already." Samuel looked up from his work. "Answers come when they're ready. No use forcing them." His words lingered in the quiet. Clara bit her lip, then allowed herself a faint smile. It felt strange on her face, as though her muscles had forgotten how. Outside, the prairie stretched endless under a canopy of stars. The wind rattled the porch boards, but inside the cabin, the fire's glow softened every shadow. For the first time in years, Clara's heart eased its frantic pace. She lay back, eyes heavy at last. Before sleep claimed her, she whispered, barely audible, "Maybe I'm not forgotten after all." When dawn came, the light spilled golden across the plains. Clara stirred, waking to the sound of hooves in the corral. She rose slowly, clutching the oversized shirt around her. Samuel was outside, tending to the horses. His figure moved steady and sure, like the rhythm of the land itself. She stepped to the window, watching. A strange ache welled in her chest, not fear, not sorrow, but something gentler. The ranch, with its fields and fences, with its chickens scratching in the dirt and cattle lowing in the distance, seemed a world apart from the shack she had left behind. The sight was fragile, like glass, yet it glimmered with possibility. Clara whispered a silent prayer, not of desperation this time, but of gratitude. For the first time, she let herself believe there might be a future beyond pain. By the second evening, Clara had begun to believe in the quiet rhythm of the ranch. Samuel showed her the corral, the small barn, and the creek that wound through the back pasture. Each detail seemed to breathe safety. But safety on the frontier was a fragile thing, like glass that could shatter at the first stone. That stone came sooner than expected. The sound of hooves broke the stillness. Clara froze, her heart racing as dust rose on the horizon. One rider, then three more, crested the ridge. The lead horse bore a man she knew all too well, Earl Whitmore. Her breath caught. The bruises on her arms throbbed as though her body itself remembered his fists. Samuel stepped onto the porch, rifle resting casually against his shoulder. He didn't lift it, not yet. But his stance told Clara everything. He was ready. Earl swung down from his saddle, swaggering with the arrogance of a man who believed fear itself was his weapon. The stench of whiskey carried on the wind. He planted his boots in the dirt of Samuel's yard. "Where is she?" Earl barked, voice raw from drink. Inside, Clara clutched the sleeve of Samuel's shirt tighter around her. Her knees shook, but she did not retreat. Slowly, she stepped into the doorway. Her face was pale, but her eyes, though trembling, met Earl's. "No!" she whispered. The word seemed impossibly small against the vastness of the plains. Earl sneered. "What did you say?" Clara drew a shuddering breath. The fire in the hearth still warmed her back, and Samuel's steady presence anchored her. She raised her voice, stronger this time. "No, not any more!" For a moment, even the wind seemed to hush. Earl's face twisted, his pride stung deeper than any knife. "You think you've got a choice?" His eyes flicked toward Samuel. "You think this old rancher can keep you from me?" Samuel's voice cut through the air, calm and cold as steel. "She's not yours, Earl. Not now, not ever again." The two men locked eyes. The weight of the standoff settled like a storm about to break. Earl spat in the dirt, his fury smoldering. But even in his drunken haze, he saw something in Samuel's stance, a man who would not bend. The rifle in his hands was steady, and his will even steadier. Earl cursed, jerking the reins of his horse. "This ain't over," he growled. "She'll pay what's owed, one way or another." With a yank, he mounted, dust rising as he wheeled away. The other riders followed, their laughter fading into the dusk. Clara remained in the doorway, her breath uneven. Her whole body shook, but inside her something new burned. She had said no, and for the first time in years her voice had not been drowned in blows. Samuel turned to her, his eyes soft, despite the hardness he had shown moments before. "You did well," he said quietly. Clara swallowed, tears filling her eyes, not of fear this time, but of release. She had spoken, she had stood. Yet even as relief settled, a shadow lingered. Earl's words were not empty. Men like him never left without coming back stronger, and both she and Samuel knew the storm was only gathering. The morning after Earl's visit, the ranch felt different. The sun still rose golden over the plains, and the cattle still bawled in the pasture, but the air carried a tension that Clara could not shake. Every sound, the flap of a chicken's wings, the creak of the barn door, made her flinch. Samuel saw it in her eyes. He saddled his horse. "There's a man in town who needs to know about this," he said. "Stay here. Keep the doors locked. I'll be back by sundown." Clara wanted to protest, but the resolve in his tone left no room. She watched from the porch as Samuel rode off across the fields, the dust of his trail blending into the horizon. Town was small, little more than a row of wooden storefronts, a church with a steeple that reached for the sky, and the sheriff's office with its flag fluttering lazy in the breeze. Samuel dismounted, tied his horse, and stepped into the dim interior of the office. Behind the desk sat Sheriff Elias Hawkins, a man in his 60s whose hair had turned silver, but whose eyes were still sharp as a hawk's. He set aside the ledger he was writing in and leaned back, boots creaking against the floorboards. "Samuel Carter," the sheriff said, his voice carrying both familiarity and respect. "It's not often you ride in unless trouble's found you." Samuel wasted no time. He told the story plain. Earl Whitmore, the debts, the beatings, the river, Clara's near drowning, Earl's return to his ranch. Hawkins listened without interruption. When Samuel finished, the sheriff exhaled slowly, as though weighing every word. "I've seen men like Earl," he said at last, "mean enough to think fear gives them ownership, and desperate enough to gamble a woman's life against their pride." Samuel's jaw tightened. "I won't let him near her again." The sheriff studied him, then nodded. "You've done right bringing this to me. She'll be under the protection of the law now. If Whitmore shows his face again, he'll answer to more than just you." For a moment, Samuel felt the knot in his chest ease. But Hawkins leaned forward, his gaze sharpening. "Don't mistake the law for a miracle cure. Men like him don't give up."
Not when their pride's been cut. He tapped the Bible that lay on the corner of his desk, worn from years of use. "I reckon you'll need both the badge and the Lord watching over you." Samuel gave a slow nod. He tipped his hat and rose. "Then we'll be ready." By the time he returned to the ranch, dusk was falling. Clara stood on the porch, wrapped once more in his shirt, watching the horizon with anxious eyes. Relief softened her features when she saw him. "What did he say?" she asked. Samuel dismounted, his face serious but steady. "That you're safe under his protection now, and that justice will come." He paused, then added, "But Clara, he warned me. Earl won't stop until he's forced to." The words chilled her. Yet, strangely, they also steadied her. At least now she wasn't alone in the fight. The dawn broke soft and golden across the Texas plains. Clara stirred in the small bed near the hearth, the quilt slipping from her shoulders as sunlight filtered through the cabin's window. For a moment she lay still, listening. No shouting, no fists, no footsteps stomping toward her. Only the distant low of cattle and the gentle cluck of hens scratching near the porch. She sat up slowly, clutching Samuel's old shirt tighter around her. Its fabric smelled faintly of smoke and leather, and in that simple scent she felt steadier than she had in years. Rising, she moved to the window. The view beyond took her breath. Rolling fields stretched to the horizon, the grass glistening with dew. Horses grazed in the corral, their coats shining in the morning light. A hawk wheeled lazy circles high above, while in the distance Samuel moved among the cattle, his stride unhurried and sure. Clara pressed a hand against the windowsill, her heart swelling with something unfamiliar. Peace. Fragile, but real. Her lips parted, whispering a verse she had once learned as a child, a verse she thought she had long forgotten. "God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble." Psalm 46:1. The words wrapped around her like a shield. She whispered them again, stronger this time. For so long she had believed her prayers had vanished into silence. Yet here, on this ranch, in this quiet dawn, she felt heard. The door creaked open, and Samuel stepped inside, brushing dust from his hat. He carried a small tin pail of fresh milk and set it on the table.
"You're awake," he said with a faint smile. Clara nodded, returning the smile shyly. "I wanted to see the ranch in the morning light." Samuel glanced toward the window. "She's got her own kind of beauty at dawn. Reminds a man what's worth protecting." They sat together at the table, Samuel pouring the milk into 2 mugs. The warmth of the moment was simple, almost ordinary, yet it held a weight Clara could not ignore. For the first time since childhood, she allowed herself to imagine life beyond fear. Days of work and laughter, evenings of firelight and hymns, mornings just like this one. Still, beneath that hope lay an unease she could not shake. Earl's shadow lingered in her memory, heavy and cruel. She traced a finger along the rim of the mug, her voice quiet. "Do you think he'll come back?" Samuel's gaze was steady, his silence speaking before his words did. "Men like him don't give up easy. But you won't face him alone, not anymore." Clara swallowed, the knot in her chest loosening at his promise. She took another sip, letting the sweetness of the milk anchor her. Outside, the sun climbed higher, gilding the plains with light. For a fleeting moment, it felt as though the world itself had been remade. Yet in her heart, Clara knew peace this fragile could never last. The journey to explore the Wild West is still long. Subscribe to hear more true stories. If you're still watching, drop a 1 in the comments. Night draped itself across the Texas plains like a heavy shroud. The horizon burned with the last embers of daylight, then faded into blackness. Inside the cabin, Clara sat near the fire, her hands wrapped tight around a cup of tea Samuel had given her. She sipped, though her stomach churned too much to keep it down. The silence of the ranch was different that night. Not peaceful, too sharp, too fragile. Every creak of the timbers, every rustle of wind against the shutters set Clara's nerves on edge. The dogs, usually calm after dark, began to bark. First one, then the others joined, their growls rolling low, teeth flashing in the firelight outside. Samuel set down the rifle he had been cleaning and stood, listening. He moved to the door, shoulders squared, eyes narrowing into the darkness beyond the porch. His jaw tightened. "They're coming," he said. Clara rose, clutching the fabric of his old shirt closer around her. "How do you know?" The dogs answered for him, their barking sharpened, frantic now, echoing across the yard. And then she saw it too, faint glimmers on the ridge line, moving lights. One torch, then two, then a scatter of flames bobbing through the night like fiery eyes. Clara's breath hitched. Her mind reeled back to the river, the shack, Earl's hands gripping her hair. Her body remembered before her voice could speak. "No," she whispered, her knees weakening. Samuel's hand steadied her shoulder. "You're safe in here," he said. But his tone carried the weight of a man who knew safety was only as strong as the wood and nails that framed his walls. The torches grew nearer, weaving down the slope, their glow bouncing against the dark. The sound of hooves followed, steady, relentless, a drumbeat that rattled the ground. Clara pressed herself against the wall, trembling, watching shadows lengthen as the riders approached. Samuel loaded the rifle with slow, practiced movements. Each metallic click echoed like a bell of reckoning. He blew out the lantern on the table, leaving only the fire in the hearth to cast its glow. The cabin dimmed, shadows swallowing the corners. Clara clutched the small wooden cross she had carried since her mother's passing. She pressed it to her lips, whispering a prayer she could barely hear herself say. "Lord, give us strength." Outside, the torches reached the fence line. The dogs barked furiously, lunging against their chains. The horsemen slowed, their laughter carrying on the night wind, cruel, mocking. Samuel stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand. He planted his boots firmly on the boards, his silhouette framed by the firelight behind him. His voice was calm, but it cut the night like steel. "Show yourselves." The answer came in a shout, rough and slurred with whiskey. Earl Whitmore. His voice carried across the yard, venom dripping from every syllable. "Bring her out, Carter. She's mine." Clara's heart pounded, every beat a hammer against her ribs. The point of no return had come. The riders spilled into the yard, torches high, their flames casting wild shadows across the barn and corral. Horses snorted, stomping nervously under the weight of armed men. At the front sat Earl Whitmore, his hat tilted back, eyes glinting like shards of broken glass. He swung down from his saddle, boots thudding in the dirt. The stench of whiskey rolled off him, carried by the night breeze. Behind him, half a dozen men dismounted, debt collectors and drifters hungry for trouble. Their laughter was sharp, their faces twisted with the thrill of cruelty. Samuel didn't flinch. He stood firm on the porch, rifle steady in his hands, his frame illuminated by the firelight spilling from the cabin door. "You're not welcome here, Earl," he said evenly. Earl spat into the dust, grinning with rotten teeth. "Welcome? You think I need welcome? She's mine, always was, always will be." His voice rose, echoing against the cabin walls. "Bring her out, Carter, or we'll drag her out ourselves." Inside, Clara pressed against the doorframe, peering past Samuel's shoulder. Her breath trembled, but something inside her burned hotter than fear. She gripped the wooden cross in her hand until her knuckles whitened. Her voice broke through the night, fragile yet defiant. "No, Earl, not anymore." The words froze the yard for a heartbeat. The men shifted, surprised that the girl they had tormented now dared to speak. Earl's grin collapsed into a snarl. "You dare?" He took a step forward, fists clenched. "You think this old fool can protect you? He'll die for you, Clara, and then you'll crawl back on your knees." Samuel's voice was calm, but every syllable carried iron. "You're not taking her. Not tonight. Not ever." He leveled the rifle, barrel gleaming in the torchlight. The men murmured, uneasy now. Earl raised his arms, mocking. "Look at the hero, an old rancher with a gun. You think one bullet's enough against all of us?" The laughter of his men spread like fire, but Samuel didn't waver. His eyes locked on Earl, unyielding. Clara's heart pounded, but for the first time she wasn't only afraid. She felt strength in Samuel's stance, in his refusal to bow. Her whispered prayer from earlier still lingered on her lips, and she clung to it. The torches flickered in the wind, shadows dancing across the yard. Horses pawed the dirt, restless. The air itself felt stretched thin, ready to tear. Earl snarled, voice dropping low, almost a growl. "Then we take her by force." His hand slashed through the air. The men tightened their grips on knives, clubs, and pistols. Their boots shuffled forward, the dust rising around them.
Samuel shifted his stance, finger brushing the trigger. His jaw set. He knew what was coming. The line had been drawn. Words would no longer hold them back. The yard erupted in chaos. Earl's shout split the night. "Take her!" The men surged forward like wolves loosed from a pen. Torches whipped in the wind, casting jagged shadows across the cabin walls. Dust and hoofbeats churned into a storm as boots pounded toward the porch. Samuel's rifle cracked once, the sound booming across the plains. A shot into the air. The blast halted them for a heartbeat, but only a heartbeat. Then the mob roared louder, emboldened, rushing the steps. Samuel swung the rifle like a club, striking the first man square across the jaw. The thug crumpled, blood spraying from his mouth. Another lunged with a knife. Samuel twisted, the blade grazing his sleeve, then slammed the butt of the rifle into the man's chest, sending him sprawling into the dirt. But they kept coming, 2, 3 at a time. Fists and boots clashed against Samuel's frame. He grunted, holding his ground, striking, blocking, throwing men off like cattle breaking a fence. Clara screamed from the doorway.
"Samuel!" Her cry drew their attention. 2 men broke off, rushing toward her. She tried to slam the door shut, but one shoved it wide, sending her staggering backward. Hands seized her arms, rough and merciless. "No!" she shrieked, kicking wildly. Her nails clawed one man's face, leaving bloody streaks. He cursed and struck her across the cheek, the crack of the blow echoing against the cabin walls. Samuel spun at the sound, fury flashing in his eyes. He lunged toward her, knocking another attacker aside. But 3 more men piled onto his back, dragging him down into the dirt. His rifle fell from his grasp. Boots stumped his ribs, fists pounded his skull. Blood darkened his brow. "Samuel!" Clara's voice tore through the night, raw with terror. The men gripping her arms laughed, dragging her toward the yard. She twisted, kicking, fighting like a wildcat, but their hold was iron. Torchlight flickered across her face, tears streaking her cheeks, blood welling from her split lip.
Earl stepped forward through the haze of dust and fire. His grin was crooked, vicious. "You thought you could defy me, Clara? Thought you could hide behind him?" She spat toward him, trembling but fierce. "I'll never be yours again." Earl's grin twisted into a snarl. "We'll see." He raised his hand, signaling the men to pull her farther into the night. Samuel roared, shoving against the weight of his attackers. He fought to rise, but the mob pressed harder, pinning him down. Dust filled his lungs, blood blurred his vision, but still he struggled, clawing toward Clara's fading figure. The torches crackled, the dogs barked madly, chains straining. Clara screamed once more, the sound slicing the night like a blade. The ranch, once a refuge, had become a battlefield. And for the first time, Samuel feared he might not be enough to hold it. Samuel hit the ground hard, the breath torn from his chest. 3 men pinned him down, fists slamming against his ribs, boots grinding into his back. His head snapped against the dirt, blood spilling warm down his face. He groaned, forcing his arms beneath him, but the weight was too much. Earl loomed above, his shadow stretching long in the torchlight. He laughed, the sound raw and jagged. "Old man, you should have stayed out of it." He lifted his boot, aiming for Samuel's chest. "No!" Clara screamed, thrashing in the grip of the men dragging her. She clawed at their arms, kicked at their shins, desperation lending her a feral strength. One of them struck her again, a backhand across the mouth that sent her reeling. Blood smeared her lips, but still she fought. "Please," she gasped, voice cracking, "leave him alone. Take me instead. Just let him live." Her cry cut through the chaos, silencing the yard for an instant. Even Earl paused, his boot hovering. His eyes narrowed, savoring her desperation like a gambler savoring the final card. "You'd trade yourself for him?" Earl sneered. "After all his fine talk? After all his promises?" He leaned closer to her, his breath sour with liquor. "You'll always belong to me, Clara. You were born to pay my debts." Clara's knees buckled, but she forced her eyes up to meet his. "I don't belong to you. Not any more. Not ever again." Earl's face twisted in rage. He backhanded her himself, sending her sprawling into the dirt. Her wooden cross slipped from her hand, falling beside her. She reached for it with trembling fingers, whispering through tears, "Lord, be with me in the valley of shadows." Samuel groaned, rolling onto his side, coughing blood. He tried to rise, but another kick slammed him back down. The men jeered, holding him fast. Earl raised his boot again, towering over Samuel, ready to crush his chest. Clara's scream tore through the night. "Stop!" Her voice was raw, defiant even in her brokenness. The cross glinted faintly in the torchlight as her hand closed around it. The moment stretched taut, every sound sharp. The crackle of torches, the ragged breathing of men, the frantic barking of the dogs. Clara's prayer hung in the air, fragile yet unyielding. Earl snarled, fury shaking him. He brought his boot down. And Samuel twisted, catching the blow on his shoulder instead of his chest. Pain ripped through him, but his hand shot upward, seizing Earl's leg. With a roar, he dragged the drunken man off balance. Both crashed into the dirt, the gang shouting in shock. For a heartbeat, chaos faltered. Clara staggered to her feet, bloodied and trembling, clutching the cross tight. Her eyes locked on Samuel's battered form. He was still fighting, but Clara knew, deep in her bones, that without a miracle, the night would end in death. The night quaked with violence. Samuel grappled in the dirt, bruised and bloodied, while Earl staggered back to his feet with a snarl. Clara clutched her cross, whispering prayers through broken lips.
And then, from the distance came the thunder of hooves. Not a handful this time, but many. The ground itself trembled beneath the rhythm. Torches flared on the ridge, brighter, steadier, moving in formation. Voices rang out, sharp and commanding. "Sheriff Hawkins, put down your weapons!" The yard froze. Earl's men faltered, their jeers dying in their throats. Heads turned toward the ridge as riders poured down, lanterns swinging like stars torn from heaven. Horses pounded into the yard, circling, cutting off every escape. At their head rode Sheriff Elias Hawkins, tall in the saddle, his revolver gleaming in the torchlight. His silver hair caught the fire's glow, his eyes hard as steel. "Drop your arms," he thundered, voice carrying over the chaos. "This ends tonight." One of the thugs cursed, raising his pistol. A deputy fired a warning shot into the sky. The crack split the night, echoing across the plains. The man flinched, then dropped his gun into the dirt.
Others followed, knives and clubs clattering to the ground. Earl bared his teeth, fury twisting his face. "You think the law scares me, Hawkins?" he spat. "These men answer to me, not you." The sheriff's gaze didn't waver. "You've answered to whiskey and pride long enough, Earl. Tonight, you answer to justice." Clara stumbled toward Samuel, dropping to her knees beside him. His chest heaved with ragged breaths, blood streaking his brow. She pressed trembling hands to his shoulder, whispering, "Hold on, please hold on." Earl lunged toward them, but 3 deputies swung down from their saddles, rifles leveled. "Back away," one barked. For the first time, Earl hesitated. His swagger faltered under the ring of cold steel. His eyes darted to the men around him, men who had already dropped their weapons, their loyalty slipping through their fingers like sand. "Don't do this, Earl," Hawkins warned, his voice sharp but not without weight. "You've lost. Lay it down before you lose more." The night held its breath. Earl's chest rose and fell, rage and fear warring in his eyes. For a heartbeat, it seemed he might charge anyway, throw himself into death rather than admit defeat. But the sight of Clara clutching Samuel, the steady line of rifles pointed his way, and the ring of lanterns blazing like a judgment fire broke him. His shoulders sagged, the fight drained from his eyes. He cursed low, bitter, and dropped his knife into the dirt. The yard exhaled. Sheriff Hawkins raised his hand. "Bind them," he ordered. Deputies moved swiftly, ropes tightening around wrists, shoving Earl and his men toward their horses. Clara clung to Samuel, tears falling freely. For the first time in years, she felt the grip of terror begin to loosen. Justice had ridden through the night. The torches guttered in the night air as the fight drained from the yard. Deputies bound Earl's wrists with coarse rope, shoving him toward his horse. His curses filled the silence, bitter and venomous, but powerless now. The men who had laughed and jeered hours before hung their heads, their weapons discarded in the dirt. Sheriff Hawkins dismounted, his boots crunching over gravel. He glanced down at Samuel, battered and bloodied but still breathing. The sheriff tipped his hat, respect plain in his eyes. "You held the line, Carter. Long enough for the law to ride in." Samuel gave a faint nod, wincing as Clara helped him sit upright. His chest rose in ragged breaths, but his eyes stayed fixed on her, on the fact that she was alive, that she was free. Clara knelt beside him, clutching his hand with both of hers. Tears streamed down her face, not of terror, but of release, pouring out years of torment that had finally broken. She pressed her forehead against his shoulder, whispering through sobs, "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." Psalm 23:4.
The words trembled in the air, a prayer not of desperation now, but of victory. Samuel's hand squeezed hers weakly, his lips curving into the faintest smile. For all the pain searing through his body, he knew this truth. Clara Hayes would never again be under Earl Whitmore's chains. Deputies hauled Earl into the saddle, ropes cutting into his flesh. His head hung low, his fury broken under the weight of defeat. Sheriff Hawkins swung back into his own saddle, his deputies forming a ring around the prisoners.
With a sharp command, they rode off into the night, their lanterns fading across the plains until only silence remained. The yard was still once more. The dogs, their work done, sank back onto their haunches, panting. The stars wheeled overhead, bright against the black sky. Only the crackle of the dying fire in the hearth whispered of what had passed. Clara turned back to Samuel, brushing the blood from his brow with trembling fingers. "It's over," she whispered, almost as if testing the words. Then, with greater strength, "It's truly over." Samuel leaned into her touch, eyes heavy but steady. "He'll never hurt you again." Clara's sobs deepened, but they were no longer cries of fear. They were tears of freedom, of a soul unchained. She buried her face against him, clutching the cross still tight in her hand. The storm had broken. And in the hush that followed, Clara Hayes felt the first true breath of peace she had known in years. If you like this video, please comment number 9. If you don't like it, please comment number 0. And please leave a comment and share your feelings. Dawn crept slowly over the Texas plains, soft and golden after the violence of the night before. The storm had passed, leaving the ranch in silence. Smoke still curled faintly from the torches scattered in the dirt, now nothing more than blackened sticks. The yard bore the scars of the struggle, trampled earth, broken boards, blood darkening the dust. But all was still. Inside the cabin, Samuel Carter stirred on the bed near the hearth. His ribs ached with every breath, his brow bandaged, but his chest rose steady. Clara sat close, a basin of water and a cloth in her hands. She dabbed at his wounds with care, her touch gentle, her eyes tender. "You should rest," she whispered. Samuel opened his eyes, rough with fatigue but lit with quiet strength. "You've been watching over me all night." Clara smiled faintly. "After all you've done for me, it's the least I can do." Her gaze drifted toward the window. The horizon stretched wide and bright, the grass sparkling with dew, as if the land itself had been cleansed by the night's trial. A single hawk wheeled high in the sky, free and unbound. Clara breathed deeply, as though drawing that freedom into herself. "It feels different this morning," she murmured. "Like the world has been made new." Samuel followed her gaze, then reached for her hand. His calloused fingers enclosed hers, warm despite his wounds. "Maybe it has," he said softly. For a long while they sat in silence, listening to the ranch come alive. Chickens clucked near the barn. A calf bawled, searching for its mother. The dogs, weary from their long vigil, dozed near the porch. Every sound was ordinary, yet every sound felt like a promise that life, fragile as it was, would go on. Clara brushed a stray lock of hair from her face, her thoughts heavy but not with fear. For years she had woken each morning bracing for pain, for shouting, for blows. But this morning, for the first time, she had awakened to safety. She traced her thumb over the small wooden cross she still held, whispering a prayer of thanks. "I thought I was forgotten," she admitted quietly. "I thought the Lord had turned his face from me." Samuel's thumb brushed across her knuckles, steady and firm. "He never left you, Clara. He brought you through the waters, through the fire, and set your feet here."
Her eyes filled with tears, but they were soft tears, healing tears. She leaned her forehead against his shoulder, whispering, "Then maybe this ranch is more than a place. Maybe it's a refuge." Samuel smiled, though the expression was weary. A refuge needs more than land and fences. It needs people who believe in it. Maybe together we can make it that way. Clara lifted her head, searching his face. She saw not only the scars of the battle, but the deeper lines of a man who had carried burdens of his own, who had chosen to stand not because it was easy, but because it was right. She realized then that her safety had not come only from his rifle or his fists, but from his presence, steady, unyielding, anchored in something greater than himself. Outside, the sun climbed higher, warming the land with golden light. Clara rose, stepping onto the porch. The fields stretched endless before her, wildflowers trembling in the breeze. She drew in a breath of the morning air, clean and sweet, and felt it settle deep in her soul. For the first time in years, she did not see chains when she closed her eyes. She saw wide horizons. Turning back, she found Samuel watching her from the doorway, leaning against the frame, his hand pressed to his bandaged ribs. His smile was faint, but real. "Clara Hayes," he said, his voice low but certain. "You've got a life ahead of you now, one no man can take from you." She met his gaze, her own voice trembling but sure. "And maybe I don't have to walk it alone." The words hung in the air, tender as the dawn itself. The days that followed unfolded with a quiet rhythm, as though the ranch itself sought to mend what the night had broken. Samuel's wounds healed slowly under Clara's steady care. Each morning she rose early, tending the animals, learning the small tasks of ranch life. Each evening she sat beside him by the fire, the silence between them no longer heavy, but warm. Word of Earl Whitmore's arrest spread quickly through the county. Folks in town spoke of the rancher who had stood against a gang with nothing but grit, and of the young woman who had found her voice after years of silence. Some whispered it was providence, others called it justice. Clara knew in her heart it was both. One morning, as the sun climbed high, Clara saddled a horse under Samuel's guidance. Her hands trembled at first, but he steadied them with patient instruction. She mounted awkwardly, then found her balance as the horse shifted beneath her. The wind lifted her hair, carrying it across her face. She laughed, a sound she had not made in years. Samuel watched from the fence line, his smile deepening at the sight. "You ride like you were born to it," he called. Clara shook her head, cheeks flushed. "No, but maybe I was born for freedom." Her words hung in the air, truer than she had meant them to be. That evening they shared supper at the wooden table. The cabin glowed with lamplight, the day's labor leaving them weary but content. Clara looked across at Samuel, his face lined with age and hardship, yet softened by kindness. "You gave me back my life," she said softly. Samuel set down his fork, meeting her gaze. "No, Clara, the Lord gave you back your life. I was only the hand He used." Her eyes filled, but not with sorrow. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. "Then maybe He's still writing the rest of the story." Samuel's grip tightened, his expression both solemn and tender. "If He is, I reckon He's not finished with either of us yet." Later, Clara stepped out onto the porch. The sky above was a tapestry of stars, vast and endless. The plain stretched in every direction, quiet and free. She breathed deeply, her heart no longer shackled by fear. For years she had lived in shadows, convinced she was cursed, forgotten. Now she stood in the light of a new beginning, her faith restored, her spirit unchained. She whispered into the night, words carried by the wind. "Thank you, Lord, for bringing me through the waters, through the fire, and into the wide country of your grace." Behind her, Samuel joined her on the porch, his steps slow but steady. He leaned against the railing beside her, the silence between them filled with unspoken understanding. They did not need to name what bound them now. It was enough to know that hope had taken root where despair once ruled. The horizon stretched before them, endless as the mercy that had spared them both. Clara Hayes turned her face toward it, no longer the broken girl by the riverbank, but a woman reborn in courage and faith. Samuel Carter stood beside her, weathered and strong, no longer a lonely rancher, but a man who had found purpose again. Together, they faced the dawn of a new life.
And for the first time, neither of them feared what tomorrow might bring. Stories like Clara and Samuel's remind us that the Wild West was not only about guns and cattle drives, it was about ordinary souls who bore extraordinary burdens, and who found strength in love, faith, and courage. Many of us carry scars of our own, loss, betrayal, loneliness, and we wonder if hope can still be found after so much darkness. Clara's journey whispers the answer, yes, there is always light, even in the valley of shadows. Perhaps you have known what it is to feel forgotten. Perhaps you, too, have prayed in silence. If so, take heart in remembering that redemption can rise from the dust, and peace can be found even on the hardest frontier. If this story moved you, let us walk this trail together. Subscribe for more true Wild West stories of courage and faith, because the battles of the past still speak to the hearts of today.